Former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett can usually be relied upon to have some opinions about what's happening there, and he joins me now. Jeff Kennett, thank you for your time. Good to talk with you. Months of lockdown, an earthquake, and now rioting in the streets. You can't get a break down there in Melbourne, can you?
No, it's tough, I must admit, but we'll come out of this, Tracy. It's going to take some time. There's no doubt the community is dispirited. We don't have a clear direction as to what the future holds, and people are very worried about lockdowns continuing, no more so than our health workers and particularly our police force, who are now under increasing attack by members of their own community. So we've got some challenges. We have an immediate challenge in terms of learning to manage and live with the virus. We have a bigger challenge of how we're going to come out of this pandemic, because for 2 years now almost, Victoria has been going backwards.
Let's take some of that piece by piece. These protests this week have been predicated supposedly on mandatory vaccination in the construction industry. And you've described the Andrews government as a cancer in Victoria. But if a mob of anti-vaxxers turns on its union, and then the union in turn says they're not members, they're a bunch of anarchists and extremists, how's that the Premier's fault? Well,
I've been saying for a long time that I don't blame the government or the Premier for the fact that we have the virus. It's an international issue. But the way in which they've managed it has been appalling. I don't blame the Premier for these riots, per se, and the people who are taking part in them. But the way in which he's gone about this lockdown of the construction industry, which doesn't only affect those in high-rise buildings, it affects the tradies out on the street, the plumber, the electrician, those builders, small builders who are doing what I would call family homes, etc. It's just been a across-the-board lockdown without there being any real management. So again, please don't get me wrong. It's not the Premier's fault that we have the virus. It is certainly his and his government's fault from the way in which they've managed this crisis, and that's led us to where we are today. Even now, as I sit here, I don't know who make up the numbers of those who are demonstrating and demonstrating violently. I'm not opposed to demonstrations. But in a democracy, to be able to demonstrate is one thing, but to then act violently is totally unacceptable. And we have got to make sure, particularly after today where our shrine of remembrance was literally occupied by these violent individuals, it is totally unacceptable. And the public are tired. We're exhausted, Tracy. We want to see light. I think we'll get there, but I fear that we've still got potentially between now and Christmas and maybe after, when we'll still be experiencing some form of lockdown.
Lockdown is terrible and nobody loves it, obviously. It's a very, very blunt instrument. But when you still have vaccination rates that are too low and you have this virus that the numbers of the virus are too high, how do you protect the hospital industry, the health industry and hospitals without lockdown?
Well, we've had this virus for 2 years now, and we've been told some time ago that we're going to increase the number of ICU beds, etc., etc. And if we haven't been preparing for an escalation in cases, I don't know what we've been doing, because we've been seeing what's been happening around the world. And as I said, this virus is with us for years, and it may be followed up, the Delta strain, by the MU strain, which is now sweeping through the United States. So you can't just exist on medical advice alone. Talk to our parents, our single parents, who are homeschooling month after month after month, our children, who have no experience, particularly the young ones in primary school, of the discipline of going to school, of the disadvantage to their education, of the disadvantage to their social education as young people. So please, I understand we've got to listen to medical advice, but you've also got to take into consideration the impact of your directions and directives on children and on businesses and on the economy as a whole, and we haven't done that. We've only been operating for 2 years now on one set of advice. Now, to his credit, the Premier has changed tactics. He's now said, aiming for zero cases is not going to work. And he has put forward a plan where we might come out of this pandemic if in fact we achieve certain milestones. What he hasn't told us, particularly, what happens if we don't get to 80% of all those eligible having had 2 doses? What happens then? What is plan B? And this is what's upsetting most of our community now. We simply don't know what the future holds. And to some degree, reinforced by what's happened this week, the Premier and the government has lost a lot of their moral authority. They can yell, they can scream, they can keep telling us what to do, but after 2 years of this, Tracy, I've got to say to you, many in this electorate, this state, are just exhausted.
I think we feel your exhaustion down there, and I think we feel sympathy for you. By the way, did the earth move for you, Jeff? Did you feel the earthquake this morning?
Yes, I did. In fact, I was on a Zoom conference call to some board colleagues down in Geelong. So I'm based here in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and I was having this Zoom conference call and saw them in Geelong. It must have hit them about a second or a second and a half later. Look, it's been an experience. For many, it was a bit scary. No one hurt. Some property damage. Let's hope there's no follow-up.
Let's hope indeed. All right, thank you for your time. Former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett.